So, all right, so this is the second version of Texas Mentor Talk for any of you joining the recording. Largely, we're just here to get the mentors from around Texas and mostly FRC to talk and share ideas when we can't all physically be in the same place or going to events and seeing each other. Today, we're going to talk about how we design robots together and like how our teams actually design robots and distribute the work. We're going to start first with Ricky showing us a demo of Onshape and some of the things that we can do with the Onshape CAD package. So Ricky and Rachel, go ahead and take it away.
Awesome. Yeah, so we're just gonna jump right into it. For those of you who don't know what Onshape is, it's a cloud-based CAD platform. And that brings a lot of advantages, especially for FRC. Some of you probably use different CAD packages for what you do professionally or just through your robotics program. But we're going to talk about Onshape here and how maybe it could benefit, especially kind of now during the pandemic where you might not have access to the CAD computers that you're used to using or just access to your lab at all. So I work on team 1745. We've been using Onshape for 3 years, and this is kind of be my perspective on using Onshape for FRC. Rachel is looking at using Onshape for her team 3005 for the upcoming year, and her perspective just as a team just getting started and transitioning from kind of a traditional CAD package. I think you guys use Inventor, correct?
Yeah, we use Inventor 2017.
So we're just going to kind of go through high level, highlighting different things through demos, how Onshape is different from a SolidWorks or an Inventor or a Creo, and then just, I guess, open it up for questions. So while Onshape is a startup, it was recently acquired by PTC, which kind of gives some legitimacy to it. As far as they've stated, Onshape's here to stay. To an extent, it's a little bit like the future. It's the Google Docs of the CAD world. And not only is it CAD, but it incorporates all the data management and collaboration tools that you'd expect from a CAD platform, which makes it really easy to use, especially kind of in the FRC environment. So we don't have to download anything. We don't have any license codes. Anyone can sign up for an education login and immediately be connected to the rest of the team members. And we'll talk a little bit about how you do that. Go ahead.
I'm going to interrupt Ricky real fast. So from the 3005 perspective, we had to have computers in our lab with the software on them, and then our students majority did not have laptops. Maybe we had 1 or 2 kids out of the whole team that had laptops, and so getting them engaged in CAD when they don't have time to practice on their own is very difficult. And if we're going to say there's something good that's come out of COVID-19, it's that the district has DISD has come through and said every single student now has a Chromebook and a hotspot. So now this went from unobtainable to get them all laptops to the district gave them laptops and internet, which is one of the reasons we're looking at this.
Yeah, and I think, the other side of that is, we've had students who've had Mac laptops. They couldn't do SolidWorks, which is what we were using. And all of our students now have Chromebooks, so, they can really easily access it. It's not, super fast or anything, but it's better than nothing. So this is my biased feature comparison about comparing Onshape and SolidWorks. Really, like we already said, no downloads, no installs. No updates, so all the updates happen automatically and seamlessly. Everyone's updated at the same time. Can run it on any computer with a modern browser. Integrated PDM, which is huge. You don't have to have a GrabCAD or a Vault set up.
So for those of you who don't know what PDM is, it's like version control. So if you think in Google Docs, anytime anybody makes any change, you can always roll back.
Right, and you don't have files on your computer, so a student can't just forget to check something in. It's always going to be the latest thing that was done, down to the very feature. You have infinite undo and restore. There's options for branching designs and merging them back. And you can see people working collaboratively. So you can see which part of the robot they're working in. You can follow them and see what they're seeing to an extent. And it really helps you, work together, but also avoid each other when you are trying to work on the robot at the same time. SolidWorks is a more powerful platform. There's going to be features that, a SolidWorks from Inventor has that Onshape doesn't have. But, from my perspective, this isn't really anything that's going to, be a deal breaker for designing a robot. SolidWorks has more FEA and CFD and dynamic analysis, motion analysis built in. Onshape has like an app store that, there are companies developing, these sort of add-ins for Onshape, but they're not necessarily as far along as you would see in SolidWorks. And, that's something that, depending on what your team does and how they use those sort of analysis packages, you might want to, check in on those sorts of things, every year, 2 years, just to see where they come, because I'm sure at some point they'll be comparable to what we have in the traditional packages. They're not there yet. Same thing with CAM, workflows for Onshape, right now it's just like export it, import it into a different CAM package, Fusion 360 or HSM Works or something. SolidWorks is a little more integrated, but it's still an add-in. Then a couple things that are really cool for Onshape are, there is MKCAD, which is an FRC parts library for your VEX and your Rev and your AndyMark and your West Coast product parts. And we'll show you that. And then Featurescripts, which are like custom programs basically written to automate some of the common tasks that you might do while building robots. So feel free to interrupt us at any time. I'm just going to keep going if I'm not interrupted. This is just a screenshot of the landing page for Onshape. So this is what you're going to see when you log in. Down the center, you have all your documents. On the left side, you have what are your filters. So, documents that you created, documents that were shared with you, your teams, which we'll get into, and labels, which we'll also get into. The right side's just your detail. So you can click on it once. It'll show you some more details about that document. And if you double click it, it'll open that document. And then there's a create button at the top that allows you to create new documents. I'm gonna switch over to Onshape real quick just to show you this live. So mine's gonna look a lot more crowded than other people's because I'm a part of a number of different teams. The one thing you didn't see in my screenshot is you have your recently opened documents across the top. And then you see all your folder organization below that. You can see it's a lot of folders. I can come over here and say, I just want the Pierce Robotics folder. So these are just my team's folders. We create a folder, for each year. We have FTC, FRC. And this is something that every mentor and student can see if they're added to the team. So it's really handy to share files back and forth. All right. So a document in Onshape, your document is, it is your robot. So the document holds all your parts, all your assemblies, all your drawings, all of your other files. Maybe you have, a component on your robot that you want to have the data sheet for, so you can put a PDF up there. You can put, there's different applications, add-ins that we use. One of them is Link Tab, so we can tie in Google Docs. So we have our, internal engineering notebook, internal JVN spreadsheet built as a Google Doc that we just bring right into our Onshape. And you can see it in the in the Onshape interface. So that kind of stuff's really cool. And it's really, you just need to think of a document as everything that you'd want to lump together with your robot. There are certain things that we don't pull into a document. So for example, we try to iterate and reuse gearboxes from year to year, especially for our drivetrain. So that might live as a separate document just because it's easier for me to pull it out and make a copy of it. But for the most part, that's it. Everything else it lives in this one single document, which makes it really easy to point your students to it when they're just getting started.
This also addressed one of my permissions concerns. I'm always wary about one student coming in and creating a lot of content, and then you never know what happens. They blow up, or they leave the team on bad terms, or they're just not paying attention and they delete a whole bunch of stuff. Because you create the document, you own the data, and everybody can contribute to it, but you're not at risk of losing information.
Do you import CAD for COTS items to the same shared document for the whole robot, or do you link documents for COTS parts? So
that's a great question. Majority of the COTS parts that we use, probably like 99% of it, are coming from MKCAD, so I'm not importing anything. I'm just pulling it from the public parts library. When I do want to import something, say I have a random part from McMaster that I want to use, I kind of have to make a decision, right? Do I import it to that document because I don't feel like I'm going to use it necessarily in any other year? That's usually what I do. But sometimes it's just something that, maybe I'll reuse it. And so we have a very small team part library that, I have a McMaster folder, and I'll have a document in there that I can pull those parts into. So it's really on a case-by-case basis. If I don't feel like I'm going to reuse that part from year to year, I'll just import it directly into the document.
So I think one other way to ask that question, or maybe answer that question, is if I'm pulling in from the MKCAD parts library, I'm looking at a live, updatable content that's maintained by the MKCAD team. So if an error is found, they can update it, and my CAD will have the opportunity to update, but I'm not required to update. Is that correct?
Right. So, for any document, and this is probably a little bit advanced, but, every version that's created can be referenced. So I can pull apart and look through all its version history and pull the specific one that I want. Usually the one you want is the latest, but that's not always the case, especially if you're, thinking about it from like a professional standpoint. Like maybe you need to use an older version for a specific reason.
Does that also mean, like, say, use example, you created a gearbox and you put it in a separate library so that you can reuse it and say, hey, Phil, you can use this too. And then you send me a link, and then I import it or use it in my design, just like using a part from MKCAD.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
You have options too. You can either import it as a link, or you can copy it and make it your own and do whatever you want with it.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, we did that with some of the MKCAD stuff that was really complex, and just like stripped out the guts of gearboxes and stuff so that it would be quicker to be manipulated and rendered.
Yeah, absolutely.
This slide you have up here, it partially answers the question I had. If you have different students working on different assemblies, what's your recommended workflow? Separate documents that are then linked and merged together, or one document and each student working inside their own assembly tab here?
So
at the same time.
So my preference, my recommendation is one document per robot. So you have different assembly tabs, sub-assembly tabs, and then you have your top-level assembly, as I call it. So let me switch over to, this is our 2019 robot. So at a top level, I have the robot on the field. I have my top-level assembly, which contains, everything that's on the robot. Takes a second to load. This isn't going to be, the fastest option that's out there, but it's not too bad.
Feels just like SolidWorks so far.
Yeah.
So I did find that, so my computer has a dedicated graphics. I'm not a computer person, so
Mhm.
bear with me here. But my computer has a dedicated graphics card, and you can force your browser to launch using the graphics card instead of your whatever other GPU, and then it runs a little bit better.
Yeah, I don't know if I've done that, Rachel, but I'm running off my work Dell Precision CAD workstation, so it should be pretty speedy, but I don't know if I've checked out those options. But yeah, so this is top level assembly. You can see we have kind of a standard folder organization. We have our drivetrain and our chassis, electrical components, pneumatic components, our climber, shooter, hopper. Then I have a folder for just like the game elements, and the field's actually pulled in from MKCAD. And then I have my random COTS folder, which is just random parts that we imported that weren't part of MKCAD. And then this last folder, CAD imports, is automatically created by Onshape when you import anything. So in each of these is going to be one or more sub-assemblies. So here I have a bumper assembly. A student could work on this and put it together without interrupting anything anyone else is doing. If you have two students working in the same tab, it can kind of, you can't quite see what the other person's doing, and so you could mess someone else up. Like I was working on something and I was just like hiding a bunch of other parts just so I could see what I was doing, and then the other person was unhiding them. And so it was just like I was super confused because I didn't realize we were in the same tab at the same time. But little things like that will throw you off if you're not paying attention. But
Is there a way to temporarily lock a tab so you know it's just yours for a while?
No. But yeah, Rachel just popped into this document.
Yep.
So you can see that Rachel's in this tab, or she's actually in this other tab.
Yep, I'm going to come join you in this bumper thing.
Okay.
Yeah. And so now we're both in the same tab. I can double click on her picture up here, and now I'm actually following Rachel, and I can see what she's clicking on and what she's doing. So
that's creepy. I didn't know it did that.
That's super cool.
But that problem of people running over each other, that's usually if you have a lot of people working on CAD, and a lot of the teams I've worked with, there's only like 2 people doing it. So in those instances, it's highly unlikely, I guess.
Well, this at least lets me know that we're trying to edit the same thing if I'm paying attention. Before, when we were using Inventor and GrabCAD, I sync down, I do a bunch of work, and I sync up at the same time as somebody else is synced down, and we're trying to push conflicting stuff, and there's just no way to merge that data, right? Just one person or the other has to throw it away without knowing what the actual changes were. So at least you have the opportunity to communicate with the other person here and say, hey, who's got priority?
Absolutely. And kind of to get into this a little bit, we've talked about the tabs. There's part studios, which we'll get into a little bit more next. There's assemblies, which are pretty traditional. The mating in Onshape's a little different than what SolidWorks is, but you can pick it up pretty fast. And then there's drawings, which are pretty standard. Well, this is actually, the drawing's locking me out because Rachel's in there.
All right, I'll get out.
Which is nice. There actually, a lot of the recent updates have been around beefing up the drawing. So here's a belly pan drawing. I don't even know why I made this drawing. There's no dimensions on it. We just plasma cut it.
Because usually you export these things and you take them to our shop. That's what we do.
Right. So this isn't a DXF, but yeah, it's the same thing. And then if I click this button in the bottom left-hand corner, this actually pulls open a little bit better view of what all my tabs are. I can open and close things at the same time. I can drag single or multiple tabs between different folders, and it gives you a little thumbnails that you can quickly find what you're looking for. You have a search bar. You can filter between part studios, assemblies, drawings, DWGs, PDFs, step files. So this is really your go-to when you're actually trying to navigate a document. And if you double-click something, it'll just take you right there. And up at the top here, this is going to be general file, like if you want to print something or change the workspace units, rename it. Here is our versions and histories. So you can see, we've created a bunch of versions. For some reason, someone named them all V1. That was a student.
Try again.
Yeah, but like I can look through any here and I can see everything that's happened, and I can revert back to any of these steps or any of the main versions. So when you save a version, which is this third button, this is really when it becomes accessible to other people. Like let's say you have your robot document's public. People aren't going to be able to really like copy it and link to anything except for either the very latest, which is called main, or an explicit version that you create. So for example, when I'm creating a file in MKCAD, if I don't save it as that first V1 version, no one else has access to it. They can't add it to the robot. So it doesn't play too much of a role if you just have your team's robot. But when it comes to linking between documents, let's say you want to create your own private parts library, you need to save it as a version before you're going to be able to pull those parts into your robot. So that's just kind of something you have to watch out for. And then there's some sharing options here. You can link directly to the Learning Center or the App Store. Comments are here. You can see different comments, and this will keep your whole comment history. You can see here, just like in Slack, I can tag someone directly. I can assign tasks to different people, which is useful. We haven't used it too much, but it is possible. All right.
Oh, just curious. So the previous year, the team I worked with used Onshape, and I forgot where we found this, but they said that we should create a account for the team and put the robot design in that account rather than it being in Lena's account or in Sophia's account or whatever.
Yeah, that's what I would recommend. Right now, my team actually hasn't done that, but our mentorship is pretty stable. So either I own it or Stuart, our lead mentor, owns it. But yeah, definitely for most teams, I'd recommend that you have an email account and an Onshape account, that's accessible by more than one person. Mm-hmm. If you started out and you didn't do that, you can transfer ownership of a document from that landing page to someone else. So you can kind of do it after the fact if you need to. But that is best practice. So we kind of went through this.
Yeah, so I made this slide because this concept was super confusing to me. I watched several videos before it really made it clear to me that, and I think Ricky did a really good job of that, so maybe this is clear to everybody now. But the left-hand side, that section was just the organization of, and I hate the word document almost because it's like your project. Document to me is a single item, and this is really a collection of items. So this is where you organize your files, but that's not necessarily what you're looking at. Versus along the bottom, you see there's home, and then I'm in drivetrain. That's where I am in the folder tree. And then these are the things that are available to me within this folder. So it was kind of the duplicity of the two different ways that you can see things versus where you are.
Yeah, personally, this left side, I usually keep that closed unless I'm trying to find something or I'm trying to, reorganize.
And I think that's an advanced feature skill. I've been pretty attached to the left-hand side right now, but I can see as I get more comfortable how I would live in the bottom section because robots are going to have a pretty common structure based on how your team builds stuff.
Right. So one of the things that really makes Onshape cool is the Part Studio concept, where you are, given an environment where you can create multiple parts that are all referenced together. So what I have these images here, these are just 3 part studios I went and grabbed some screenshots of. The bottom left one is one of our drivetrains. The middle one is a intake from 1678 from deep space, and the rightmost one is a 319, I guess their shooter tower / climber. And this is all a single part studio. This is not an assembly. All these parts were created in context with each other. And it's a really powerful way to build robots where, you want to link dimensions together. And those parts typically, they don't need to, but they typically, are static relative to one another. It's not explicitly true that they have to remain static once you bring them into an assembly, but it's anything like if you have these telescoping tubes, you might want to model those all together, even though that ultimately, you're going to need to, add some motion to them in the assembly. I don't have a super great way of demoing this on the fly, but we can just pop back into Onshape. And I can show you, so this, for example, is our chassis and our bumpers. And this is the screenshot that was on that page. It's just all modeled together. So you can see on the left, this is my feature tree. The top parts of the feature tree, I guess I should say, and the bottom parts, all my parts. So I have 33 parts here. All the different brackets and gussets and angles and tubes. Most of it's named. I think we're probably going to switch over to part numbers next year because it's got pretty out of hand. So you can see I start with some different, these are variables that I created so I can quickly see how big the chassis is, what the drop center is, how high off the virtual ground that my bumpers are. Then I start getting into features. So my first feature, I'm actually bringing in the basic tube structure from a separate document, and this is just something that my team does. We create a configurable West Coast drive that has all of the holes for the style of drivetrains that we like to build. And then I start adding the belly pan, and I start adding the gussets, and I start adding the bumpers. And I've organized, grouped all these in kind of like folders so that, I can collapse it a little bit better. So we have, extrudes and cuts and fillets and, all the standard features that you might find in any CAD package. You have sweeps and lofts, and there's the ability to make surfaces here. So for example, if I go into extrude, I can extrude a solid or I can extrude a surface. I can extrude something as a new part, or I can merge it with existing parts. So this is a little bit different from SolidWorks, but not necessarily different from other CAD packages. But your add and your remove, are both considered extrudes. You can also do intersections to get even more complex geometry. And all this is pretty powerful. Standard constraints when you're extruding. And then you can select the bodies that it's merging with. Any questions there?
In your parts, you've got 33 parts. If I'm not mistaken, like at the very bottom, I see bumper support 3 times. So that means that there's 3 instances or more of exactly the same part, right?
Yeah, that comes down to personal preference. For me, sometimes it's easier to mirror a part in my part studio rather than importing it into my assembly and then making separate instances of it. I was just talking about this with Rachel. Like it's really just comes down to what you think is easier, faster.
So Ricky, if you go back to the slideshow for a second and go to the next slide.
Yeah.
This is a person who has just recently drank the Kool-Aid. I'll give the example that they give us in training. The Onshape training is super excellent, by the way. when you multi-part models, you don't want to put like this bunch of unrelated parts together in the same sketch. That doesn't make sense. And also it's kind of dumb because even if this all fit together, when you go to put it in an assembly, it'll all just look like this, and that's not really how you'd want to put it together anyway. So go ahead and click again. So the example they give, which I think we can all kind of relate to, is on the left-hand side is the part studio. Each one of the unique parts is modeled here. And most of these you only have one of, except for this tie rod, which would be, you can imagine you'd want 4 of them. So the way you model this is you draw it like this on the left-hand side, then you import the parts, this part studio set into your assembly. It'll plop down with everything as you see on the left-hand side. You group it together and freeze it in place, and then you can add the other 3 tie rods. So you really only have to do either one. You don't have to do a bunch of constraining. You really would plop this guy in there, freeze one piece, group it, and then pattern that tie rod. And so what normally would be make a bunch of individual parts, import them, constrain them a whole bunch of different ways, and then duplicate your part, really actually comes down to just a couple of clicks since you modeled it all together in the right instance.
Yeah, so yeah, I think this is probably what most people would do. You know, if I were doing it, I'd probably do the pattern in the part studio. That's only because when I import it to my assembly, I don't have those extra mates that, and it just keeps it a little bit cleaner for me. That's just my preference for how I would look at it.
Can I steal the ball for a second?
Yeah.
Can't start while other person's sharing. Multi-share not enabled.
Okay.
All right, share screen. So we link a video further down in the slideshow, but this is like the example how to build a West Coast drive. None of my parts are named correctly. This is a whole bunch of bad practices here. But for example, this would be your part studio. Everybody see this is like a really bad West Coast drive here. And in this, you make one of these and then you mirror it. But now you have, assuming your front and back rails are identical, this is your part studio. And then I don't have a bracket on the bottom here because I already have the bracket designed on top. But to Ricky's point, I could paste in all the brackets here, and then I would only need to do 2 things, 2 different assemblies. But here I've done a midpoint assembly, which is just, this is what, I think, Alan, this is what you were talking about, not having the ability to mirror your drivetrain as a frustration in Onshape. And so this is the way that they kind of presented how to do that. Would be you build 1/2 of it, and then your assembly is the is both of those stuck together, right? So I really only have to maintain 1/2 of this.
So my request to not be able to mirror the assembly is that we do a left-hand version. So like they're not symmetrical. You couldn't just rotate our robot.
Mm-hmm. But you can't. So that would not be a mirror across the center plane of this.
It would be.
Right. So you mirror in the part studio, and then when it comes into the assembly, it is what you want.
If you're using CAD to keep like really good track of your BOM and stuff, you know, for the parts that are the same, Onshape won't know that they were the same. It'll just list it as a discrete part. So how it's handled on the BOM side of things would probably be a little bit not ideal for people that are really relying on that BOM for manufacturing.
Okay, back to you, Ricky.
But yeah, so like our drivetrain gearbox is going to be the same on both sides. So we just plop it in twice, and you know, hopefully the chassis rails were done correctly. So that kind of brings us to the point where we're talking about assemblies, and most of our parts, we like them to be off the shelf so we don't have to manufacture them. Every team's a little bit different in that regard. But MKCAD was started by Team 1836. A guy named student named Marcus Bernstein created the MKCAD parts library and started really advertising it. So it got really popular, and it kind of became the go-to place for teams, FRC teams, to find the common parts that our FRC vendors most commonly use. So he's graduated, he's in college now. It's expanded to a small team of FRC mentors to maintain and fix issues and bring the latest, released, new season parts into it every year. It's not perfect, and we know it's not perfect. We have a Chief Delphi thread that basically people can comment on it and just let us know what the problems are. Maybe a part's missing its mass. Maybe something's not moving the way that you want it to move. Like, for example, Rachel, yesterday pointed out to me that, she wanted the swerve module to rotate, not just be a static thing. So I went in there and I changed some mates, and now it rotates and it does that for everyone. So I'm one of I'm one of the members of the team that maintains this. And I think, I think we don't want to open it up fully to the public. That's a decision that we made. We want to kind of maintain some sort of, expectation and level of the quality of the parts that we're, offering to the public. But we have a Trello board where we keep track of every change that we need to make and every update that we need to make. So it's pretty well organized. So let me pop over to Onshape again, and I'm just going to go into a blank document that I've created. So this is what a blank document looks like when you first create it. You have a blank part studio, you have a blank assembly. Your insert button is going to be your favorite button. So this is where you bring new parts in. So this will be items from the current document. You can see in, I guess it's kind of a tabbed interface. The current document, I don't have any parts yet or assemblies. This is kind of a distinction that you need to point out. Sometimes you need to insert parts, and sometimes you have different subassemblies that you want to insert from your current document. Other document, this is what takes you to your different teams. So here I can bring in things from anything my team has done in the past. But I guess most importantly, you have your public documents, which is where MKCAD lives. We'll share a link with you at the end, but one of the coolest ways to bring MKCAD into your Onshape is through the use of labels. And so unfortunately, this has to be done by every account owner individually, but you can add labels to the official MKCAD document so you have really quick access to them. And so as you can see here, MKCAD's organized into a handful of documents. Maybe there's like 15 documents. We have motors and wheels. We have pre-made gearboxes that are off the shelf. We have FTC parts, pulleys and bearings and sprockets. So I'm just going to go into one of these. Let's go into gears. And so now once I'm in the gears document, these are all the different gears that are there for me. So I can pull in this. This is a VEX part. You can see the part numbers here. If I click and I place it, now it's in my assembly, and it's not made anything. I can right click on it and I can fix it. Let's say I'm building everything around this gear for some reason, so now it can't move around. And so now let's say I want to insert another gear. But the cool thing about Onshape and the cool thing about MKCAD is, we've already got in and built what we call configurable parts. So these are parts that aren't a single gear, but they're a whole series of different gears. Let's see if I can find it. Are my configurable gears not here? That is weird. I'll have to look into that later. Let's go into something else. So here are configurable pulleys. So instead of just having a single part, I'm offered a bunch of different variables and options for creating this. And I can change any of these to whatever I want it to be. And now I can insert that part into the assembly. But what's super cool is I can mate this. So let's say I do a fasten mate like that. And now I want to change that part out. I decide that it's not the right tooth count. So I can just right click on it, say change configuration. It takes me right back to how I created it in the first place. And now I can say I just want a 24 tooth. I click generate and it updates without breaking my mates. So it's pretty powerful. You can do this with pulleys and gears. I'm not exactly sure where the gears are, but they're there somewhere. But you can also do it with different, it's not what I want. So if I go into, say, let's go into Versa. I don't know, I'm having a little trouble navigating today. I haven't been doing this in a little bit.
You just pick one of the gearboxes. I think it proves the point of what the power is, and it's obvious that we can.
Yeah, I was just gonna show some extrusions.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, that's the same things there. Like you can create tubes in your part studio, but if you have a tube or a shaft or something that the length and you just want to bring it right into your assembly, that's available for you here as well. But to pop into gearboxes, here are all the different gearboxes. Let's say, we have, I feel like I'm blind today. But somewhere in here, there are configurable gearboxes. Here you can just configure like the shaft length that's coming off the gearbox. Typically, if something's configurable, if you hover over it, it'll say configurable in the name, usually at the end. Or you can go into assemblies. Actually, this is probably where it is. So here's like a 3-sim ball shifter. You can choose the spread. You can choose the gearing. You can choose whether it's going to be installed on a West Coast drive. And then, you just hit generate and you drag it in. So that's really the power of MKCAD. Almost everything from Vex is there. AndyMark probably isn't quite all the way there. Rev's probably mostly there. And there's some West Coast product like gearboxes and stuff in here as well. But it makes modeling really quickly especially when you don't have to maintain your own parts library, to just pull things in that a good group of people is actively maintaining, and you have the means to access them through Chief Delphi or just through me directly. So actually, I do want to show you one more thing. And this isn't MKCAD, but this is just Onshape in general. If you go into insert, this third tab, this is standard contents. So this is all your screws and washers and nuts, all nuts except nylock nuts for some reason. But you can go in here, get your screws, get your socket head, button head, socket head, cap screws, all the different lengths. You have the ability to for your own team to tie it into McMaster part numbers. So you can, if you have a specific screws that you order, it'll show up as that part number if you go through the options and select them correctly.
And the other really cool thing about this is it's not just I take one bolt and I constrain it, which at least an Inventor is like 3 constraints or 2 constraints to get it in the right spot. This is one constraint to fasten it in place. then you can duplicate it. So basically, if you have a surface that say had 6 holes on it, you could select that surface and it would drop them in all of those holes.
Yeah,
And then you can come
do
back
that through the standard content tool. There's
Yeah.
also this replicate feature that you can do similar things with.
Yeah. Well, the thing that was more cool I thought about the standard content than if you click at the face, it's got those holes. It tries to figure out what size to put in there. It plops them in every single hole. You can go back and edit it and say, well, I want a washer underneath, or I want a nut on the end. And you can go back and edit it and it just builds that stack up for you without you having to constrain all the little pieces. I know that a lot of us don't model all the bolts in our robot, but I also know that I have personally been bit by clearance issues a number of times by not having bolt heads and nuts in place. So I thought it was kind of nice that we could force ourselves to look at that kind of detail.
Hey,
Yeah,
Ricky.
absolutely.
So
Yep.
it's been something like 14, 15 months since I last used Onshape with the other team. Like with what you have on screen right now with all those mate connectors, is it?
Mm-hmm.
So you picked up the big beige gear and then you picked up the blue pulley.
Correct.
And that it's got the 3 axes, the blue, green, and red.
Yes.
With these cylindrical parts, that's not too bad. But if you go and pick up, say, a bracket, and then you pick up one of these gears or a screw or something, what we were always finding was when you wanted to mate them, it was picking up in the wrong direction. And then when you mated it, it stuck out in some, weird fashion. I don't know if that's something they've changed over the last 14 months or there's some tutorial on how to use that.
So this was very confusing to me, Phil. I'll be honest. When I first tried to do this, I was doing it all wrong. It didn't make any sense. But Onshape has really, really good training documents. And one of the videos series that walks you through how to use mate connectors, most of the parts have reasonable ones kind of built in, but you can create your own in the case that you don't have the mate connector that makes sense. But there's a flip. So when you connect those two things, it's going to line up the blue with the blue and the red with the red and the green with the green. And they're not always in the right order. And so when you go to edit, Ricky's going to show this, there's a other direction arrow, a rotate arrow. And then you can also push that play button to kind of show what options for movement it has. This is none because I forget what this is called, a fasten type. But picking the right thing. So yeah, cylindrical now it should be able to slide in and out, I think. A rotate, okay.
Oh, I remember now. Like if you had, say, a piece of square bar and you wanted to mate one corner of it with another piece of square bar, when you go select that corner, it sort of orients those 3 axes seemingly at random. So when you go and pick up this part, yeah, I've got it mated to the corner, but the orientation, each time I go and try and pick up that part, I can have a different orientation of those axes.
Yeah, so
I couldn't find a way to force it to something that I wanted.
Yeah, you kind of, that's what I found is you kind of have to rely on these. There's this, flip the axis and reorient. And I almost always have to click one of those buttons. Beyond that, I know it's a bad answer, but the program's only so smart. You can select mate connectors that are automatically generated off of faces and off of edges. So I can come in here and it's looking at the edge and it's just automatically generating things like halfway through or at the ends. But beyond that, you can just create, mate connectors, or sorry, that wasn't the right button. You can create mate connectors and use this move and realign to get it exactly how you want it. And in the example, and one thing you just have to be aware of, and I think this is just the challenge of switching, from like a SolidWorks to an Onshape is, if you're really just putting 2 tubes that are going to be fixed together, that should be done in a part studio, not necessarily in an assembly. So just kind of understanding what's the best workflow for what you're trying to do, and just getting used to it, honestly.
Okay, it's good to know I wasn't crazy or missing something because I watched all those videos that Rachel's talking about and couldn't find any clues.
So I will also say that of the 3 or 4 people that I've tried to get really going on these videos, almost all of them, it's a series of videos. If you watch it full screen, it says go to next lesson and it jumps to the very next section. or like actual lesson, not the next video in that section. So I found several people on my team were really only watching the first 2-minute, 30-second video out of a 20-minute lesson, thinking they were done, and then moving to the next one. So they were really missing a lot of information. So I would make sure that you get the whole thing.
Yeah, and mate-wise, so there's some really good things about mate connectors. It makes things super quick to put together most of the time. But every once in a while, yeah, you get stuck on something that you can't mate the way you want. There's just standard Revolute, cylindrical, planar. But then over here, there's some, if you want gears to move, you know, how you think they should, or rack and pinions or screw helix type motion. They do have options for that. They have options for creating named positions. So let's say you have an intake and you can actually create named positions, so you can just bump it back to a particular position if for whatever reason that's important to you. Let's say you want your elevator to have like a fully extended and a fully retracted position. You can just create position once, and then you can just go to them like you would, you know, a side view or a top view. Display states are kind of pretty standard across CAD. If you want to hide things and go to a specific display state, you can create that. And then in context editing, that's not something that we're going to talk about. It's kind of advanced, but if you do want to make changes in your part studios relative to something that's just in an assembly, Onshape has a pretty powerful way to do that with this in context editing. And it's actually, if you know what you're doing, it's really hard to break too, because it creates it in the context of the moment in time that you press that button. And if you update your assembly, the context will only update if you explicitly command it to update.
Is that something that you would say for someone starting out to just stay away from it?
Yes.
Okay.
But that being said, my team uses it all the time. You know, it's just a matter of becoming familiar enough with, you know, Onshape in general until you're ready to take that next step.
Yeah, I think to begin with, it's really hard to look at a part studio and think it's a part studio, not an assembly. And so I think from getting your head on straight with having lots of parts in a part studio and then also an assembly that may look exactly the same, that's probably a good reason to keep them separate to begin with.
Yeah. So moving on, Featurescript is something that's really cool. The coolest thing about it is that, you know, there have been FRC students and mentors that have already created different, basically custom part studio features for just really just kind of getting some efficiency gains. Nothing here is impossible to do. You're just using the part studio in general. But I'm going to pop into Onshape again and show you some of the things that you can do and kind of advantages you can gain from using Featurescripts. So I'm going to go to this blank part studio. I'm going to create a sketch on my top plane. I just hit the N key. It took me normal to the plane that I'm interested in. I'm going to start sketching. Let's say this is my drivetrain. I'm going to sketch some tubes. And this is not going to be perfect because I just want to show you real quickly. So let's say this is my West Coast Drive train. I can grab some edges, set them all equal. And now I'm going to exit out of my sketch. So now I can use custom features. So these are the feature scripts. I've individually gone through and added all these to my interface, and each of your students will have to do this as well for the ones that you want them to use. But once they're there forever. So I'm going to go into here, into this extrude individual. So this allows me to choose different sketch contours and create them as separate parts instead of the normal extrude, which would have created them all as one part, and I would have had to have 4 features. So now I have my 4 tubes that were all extruded, but they're not tubes yet. They're just solids. So there's another feature script, which is called tube converter. So now I can go in here and I can set the wall thickness, and now they're all 1/8" tubes. If I want to add a hole pattern, I can do that. These are some standard hole patterns that are built in, or I can do no hole pattern. Like my team, right now we don't use hole patterns, so I would just leave that blank. And
so I guess where I see using hole patterns is that I'm not so much of a glutton for punishment that I'm going to drill all those holes. But when I export it to my CAM, I can envision if I do this on a pitch, that means everything I attach to these tubes is going to be on a proper pitch. And then when I export it, I can just drill the ones that I need to drill.
Yeah, absolutely. I hadn't thought about it that way. But yeah, you can go through here. You can change hole size. You can change the pitch. You can change whether it's centered on the tube or centered from one end of the tube or starting at one end of the tube. The cool thing about this feature script is it's actually built to recognize, so let's say you went through these tubes and you put bearing holes. It would actually know which of these hole pattern holes interfered with that bearing hole that was already there, and it would just skip over that hole. So that's really cool as well. So there's a bunch of these feature scripts that are linked. I guess to quickly show you, to add a feature script, you go to add custom features, and then you'll need to, if you don't want to search them, which they're kind of difficult to search, I've included in this, at the end of this presentation, direct URLs to each of the feature scripts that I use, and they're the major ones that teams have been using. And so you just paste that URL right into the search bar, and it'll take you right to that document. And so there are just a collection of different ones that I'll share this presentation, and you'll have those links to add them directly. But there's ones for creating gears, there's ones for doing pocketing and creating chains. As the configurable parts and configurable assemblies in Onshape have gotten more and more powerful, they've kind of replaced some of the feature scripts. So before, like, for example, if I wanted to create a tube of a certain length, I made a feature script so I could do that. But now I can just create a configurable tube of the right length, and so the workflow is a little bit more straightforward. I can do it so it imports it directly into my assembly instead of having to create it in a part studio first. So there's a lot of different, like any program, there's a lot of different ways to do the same thing. And so sometimes feature scripts do the same thing that you might be able to get out of right now we have a configurable chain part studio, so you may not want to use the configurable path feature script. This is a video, we don't have to watch it. It just shows you how to create a team inside of Onshape and how to add your team members. And then kind of wrapping up, we have links here to, Onshape, getting signed up with an education account, the fundamental trainings. There's some YouTube playlists by both PTC and by an FRC mentor named Nick. It's pretty good. And then this last link is to add MKCAD with the labels so that you can really easily access those MKCAD documents when you're inserting parts into an assembly. Here are all the feature scripts. The extrude individual and the tube converter are the ones that I just showed you. There's different ones for chains and gussets, patterns for lightning. This custom length extrusion is one that I created. You can create shafts and all sorts of different tubes and extrusions, both COTS and more custom ones. MKCAD feature scripts, these are kind of the feature scripts that Marcus created for his MKCAD stuff. They've been pretty much replaced by the stuff that Julia's done and with configurable parts, so I don't think there's much use to them, but they're there. There's a new one for automated part numbering. I'm just have a comment here that I'd recommend if you want to use automated part numbering, that you create a copy of that for your team and you cut out all the extra stuff that makes it really configurable, because your team's probably not going to need it to be very configurable. You're going to have the part numbering that you like to do, and you don't really need to confuse people with the rest of it. Set material works really well. A lot of the time, the material you want to use is in the Onshape material library, but every once in a while, it's not. Or let's say you import a compressor and it doesn't really have a single material, but you can use this set material feature script to just take the weight of it. So let's say it weighs 2 pounds, and it does the density calculation and applies the correct density to make the final result the weight that you want it to be, so that when you're measuring the weight of your robot, it's as accurate as you can get. And then the final one is just a spur gear generator. Let's say you're making a geared turret or something, that you would be able to create a spur gear of whatever size, teeth, pressure angle that you want, and then you can make the modifications, the hole patterns. If it's a partial gear, you could just make a extruded cut off of the rest of it. And I'll let Rachel talk to this last part.
So since we're new to this and we're still trying to evaluate it, we're kind of in the position where we're going to have to make a change going forward. We could probably get by one more year with where we're at, but we thought that this is the perfect time with all our students home and bored to try this out, try Onshape out. And so what we're trying out doing it through Google Classroom. And I made a copy of our Google Classroom if you guys want to join and look at it. You can join with the student code of that intelligible list of letters, which I can, Ricky, you mind pasting, or I can paste that in the chat here in a second. And then, or if you want to join as a teacher, I think if I add you as a teacher, you can duplicate it if you want to do the same thing with your team and change the questions. I'd say it's like 75% of the content I want to cover is on there right now. The section where they start doing their own projects is really pretty sparse right now. That's the part that I would probably be updating next. But it kind of walks through as a little, like, what you needed to do to get started. And the kids are like points. They get scores. It's a challenge. It's not a class, and we post updates every couple days in our Discord. So if anybody wants to join, let me know.
That is it. Does anyone have any questions? I'll go ahead and post the link to this and the Texas Mentor Slack, so anyone can come back and find it.
I noticed you had the link there for getting a .edu account. Howdybots, community team, no .edu association. Do they have a nonprofit?
No, you don't need it.
Or you don't? Okay.
Not at all. Yeah, it's pretty awesome. So you can just make an account, and you'll end up with a free account. And then as a mentor, I just opened a ticket and said, can you switch mine to an EDU account? And it was done in less than 12 hours. You also can sign up through the link that he clicks. And all you have to do is say that if you're a student, you just say you're a student and you answer some questions about where you do school. And if you're a mentor, you just write teacher and then mentor.
Okay. I was looking through their offerings, and they, of course, also have Enterprise Pro and Standard. So I was just wondering, was the EDU kind of just a free version of one of those sets, or is it?
So EDU is the same thing as Standard. So well, the common misconception is like the free account, you can't have any private files, but you can with the education account.
Okay, cool.
So the only thing you're really going to be missing are some of the analytics side of things, and like the workflows for like getting parts approved that a company would want to use.
I mean, I'll be honest, I kind of want to use that too, but.
Yeah.
Are there any limits on some of the add-ons you mentioned, or any of those locked to specific SKUs? Or?
So those typically, some of them are free, a lot of them cost money, but you would want to reach out, if you want to use one, you could reach out to the company that makes it and just say, hey, we're an FRC team, can we get free access to this? And you would just have to do that on your own.
Great, thank you.